everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of the Hollyburn skirt sew along, and today it's all about sewing tools. So in order to make this beautiful skirt, you will require a couple of bits and pieces in the sewing tools department, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now first and foremost, you will of course need a sewing machine. Nothing fancy really is required in this pattern. You can get away with a machine that will just do a forward stitch, a back stitch, and possibly a zigzag, but everything that I'm going through is relatively simple, so you don't need, fancy schmancy sewing machine. My own personal sewing machine is Janome. And in order to sew with that sewing machine, you will of course need sewing machine needles. I would recommend replacing your needle before you start a new project, just to make sure that your needle is nice and sharp, but your machine should come with a variety of needles for you to use. Next up are fabric cutting tools. You may want to use scissors. When I use scissors, I use these gingers. They are super sharp and have serrated edges, and I love them. If you are going to use scissors, make sure that you use fabric only scissors, not ones that have been cutting paper. You don't want a blunt edge. Usually my fabric cutting tool of choice is a rotary cutter. Again, this is super sharp, so be careful when you're using it, and you will want to use a self-healing cutting mat if you're going to be cutting with a rotary blade. Super pretty, super sharp though, so always be careful with your cutting implements. When you're sewing, one of your key tools is going to be pins. I like to store a lot of my pins on this magnetic pin cushion. Yep, no pins coming off of that bad boy. When I'm feeling fancy, I use my little wrist holder pin cushion. I'm not gonna lie, this thing makes me feel cool. When you've finished pinning and cutting your fabric, you may well want to mark it up a little bit. My markers of choice are this one, which is a chalk pen, has a little rotating edge on it, which really transfers nicely and gives a defined line onto fabric. Comes in lots of different colours, and I have a whole load of them in my sewing toolkit. My other preferred fabric marker of choice is actually transfer paper and a tracing wheel. This is what I use to mark up the majority of my fabric before cutting it out. It has a very smooth edge on the tracing wheel, and I use this waxy transfer paper that I have in a variety of colours. When I trace across it using the tracing wheel, it gives a really nice defined line on my fashion fabric. One of the most important parts of the sewing process is actually pressing, and for that you're going to need access to an iron and an ironing board. Nothing fancy is really needed for this, just something that gets the job done and is reliable. One other tool that I do tend to use in my pressing is this. This is a tailor's ham, and by no means is it a key tool in your sewing toolbox. However, I do use mine every time I sew. The idea of this is that if you're sewing a garment that has any curved seams, if you lay the fabric across the curved edge of the tailor's ham, it makes pressing those seams easier. So like I said, by no means the most important tool in your toolkit, but if you're thinking of sewing a lot in the future, I would recommend one of these, as I do use it pretty much every time I sew a new project. Don't forget your tape measure. This little guy is every sewist's best buddy. Now this pattern does call for interfacing on the waistband. My interfacing preference is always woven iron-on interfacing, but sew-on interfacing will do the job just as well. The most important thing when choosing your interfacing is one that's appropriate for the weight of your fabric. So for example, if you're using a lightweight fabric, use a lightweight interfacing. Next up, zips! Now, this pattern calls for a 9-inch regular zip, and that's for the back fastening of the skirt. All you need to do is make sure that you pick a nice coordinating coloured zip that goes well with your fashion fabric. And as you can see, that shouldn't be a problem because zips pretty much come in every colour under the sun. Ooh, look at my dancing threads, aren't they amazing? When it comes to what kind of thread to use for this project, in terms of colour, you'll either want something that works well with your fashion fabric or a contrasting colour if you're going to want to make a statement with something like top stitching. Now, depending on which version of the skirt you're planning to make, you may also need buttons. As you can see, version B has 2 little buttons as a detail on the waistband. In terms of what kind of buttons you might want to use for this, the possibilities are endless. As with the thread, you could go for something that maybe works well with your fashion fabric that's quite subtle, or you could always go for something really over the top and full of character. I mean, who wouldn't want ladybird buttons on their skirt? How cute is that? So that's it in terms of what you'll need in your sewing toolkit for this project. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like it if you have enjoyed it, and as always, if you want more information, head over to the Inside Number 23 Ravelry group. Oh, and I forgot one more thing. No sewing toolkit is ever going to be complete without a good cup of tea and some snacks.